audio here, but it seems like nothing's coming through my headphones. It's just. Is this okay?
Yeah. I can hear you good.
Okay, cool. I just find sometimes it's hard if you use the computer audio.
There we go. We are live on 5 platforms
already.
Yeah.
Shit.
Kick it off early.
I thought we had some fucking chit chat to go before we got into it, bro.
Dude, if you listen to my podcast, this is exactly what my podcast is about. Just catching up with mates and chatting about shooting the shit.
I like it. Do you mind if I have a cigar?
Of course. Fuck, I wish I could in my house.
Well, this is not my house, but this is my office out in the garden, bro. So I'm not allowed in the house. With cigars. I'm allowed in the house.
Yeah.
Cigars.
This conversation took a horrible turn for the worst. So my podcast has been going for about 15 months now, and I think I'm up to 154 episodes. Since the pandemic came out, I've been doing one a day, Monday to Friday. And so really what I wanted to do Monday to Friday is connect with people who are either doing initiatives or industry related stuff to get real information to the industry people, because there's so much information out there that you're like, okay, well, what's real, what's not, how much is secondhand. So for you, I eventually want to start talking about Ananas and what you've done with Ananas during COVID. But really, let's take it all the way back to the very, very beginning and like introduce yourself to everybody, because most of my listeners are in Canada, not in Australia. And was it 10 o'clock there right now? 9 o'clock?
10 a.m. Yeah, man.
10 a.m.
Almost. Yeah. So
introduce everybody watching and fill them in on who you are.
All right. So my name is Sven Almenning. I live in Australia. I'm from Norway originally. I own a small bar group here in Australia with some good friends called the Speakeasy Group, which includes ODV, which is probably the more well-known of the venues overseas, as well as Boilermaker House, Mykonos, and 2 Viking-inspired restaurants called Mjolnir, named after Thor's hammer. Prior to that, I ran a consultancy agency here, I suppose, called Behind Bars. Not the same as the one in the UK, different outfit. And we, had a hand in creating the world-class competition. We created something called the Kettle One Fraternity and did a lot of brand consultancy around Australia for about 10 years. And prior to that, I worked bars and used to do a lot of writing for various magazines, Bartender Magazine, etc. So yeah, that's a quick summary of me, man.
What year did you start bartending? How old were you?
Oh, bro. I had my first hand of bartending when I worked on a Navy ship as a second lieutenant. I was the youngest officer on board, or petty officer, I suppose. In English, I think it's called petty officer. So I was the youngest officer that had to make the fucking drinks in the officer's mess. And bartended and DJ'd somehow at the Crown Prince's birthday party one year, which was fun. But I didn't really start bartending until I traveled to the States and did a course in LA in 96. So it was a while ago. I did a course in LA and I've pretty much been bartending since, or been in the bar industry since.
So what is it mandatory to be in the military in Norway, right?
It is. I joined the academy though for different reasons. So you have to join the military, but I wanted to get more out of it. So by going into officers training and getting into the officers academy, which is probably one of the bigger achievements I've done in my life, meant that we got an immense amount of training, and we got a lot more out of that year than you would if you just went in as a private, I think. But I had to stay in for additional time to work. So I stayed in the Navy for just shy of 2.5 years in total.
Oh, wow. And when did you make the move to Australia?
I moved to Australia. I came through here as a backpacker in 96. After I studied bartending in the States, I did some bartending there, came over here, worked a few bars around the country, mostly in exchange for free accommodation. And then, as you do, and then when I went back to Norway, I decided I wanted to move back overseas and Australia. I'd lived in the States for a year when I was as an exchange student. But Australia really was where I wanted to end up. So I came back here to study in '99 and did a journalism degree here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was bartending always a side hustle for you? If like you come back to do journalism, obviously, right? And I've read a lot of your content, a lot of your work. It's amazing. So was bartending always a side hustle?
It was in the beginning, yeah. To be honest, it became the main more of a main focus when I was told I needed a skilled residence visa to stay in the country, and the only thing I was skilled at doing apparently was managing bars, and so I was kind of mandated I had to do that if I wanted to stay here. But I think the thing with the industry is that, at least for me, it's so engaging and so fun and so full of energetic people from all different walks of life that I just really got pulled in. And I also really loved the stories. So, I love how you can, a bottle of whiskey that you pick up, somebody may have started making that before you were born. Not so much the case for me anymore because I'm getting so far. Like that whiskey would be expensive.
And
but
really
when I was
fucking old.
I love that idea. Now it's more like, oh, they made this when I was a teenager. Shit, I should probably find a way of turning it off. And so I stayed in. I really got pulled in by that, and I also love, the old story, the recipe books and the stories, and so it hasn't been a side hustle for me for a long time. I really do enjoy this industry.
So when was the point that you were like, you know what, journalism's great as a side hustle now? This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and really knuckle down? Because I think a lot of us get in the industry as a side hustle, as a sort of a stopgap to what we really want to do. And then 9 times out of 10, all this, like, it's a very repetitive story with this industry. People's like, well, I was really an engineer and then I fell in love with bartending. Now I'm a bartender for the last 30 years. When was the time that sort of clicked for you? Because I think a lot of younger bartenders they see it as like a go-between. Some go super serious straight away, but as a go-between. But when did it click for you to go, okay, well, you know what, this is going to be good, I should stay with this?
That's a hard one to pin down. I mean, the first thing was when I was told I had to do bartending to stay here, or manage bars to stay in the country. Obviously, there was a big push towards it. But I did do a lot of writing gigs. I had a column with GQ magazine. I had a column with the Sydney Morning Herald here in Good Food. I wrote for a bunch of men's magazines overseas about booze and whiskey, but it was all booze related pretty much. Like quite early on, I found my niche, and I just decided that rather than trying to do a bunch of stuff I wasn't good at, I try to focus on one thing I seem to have a knack for, which was booze, just really interested in that. And so I think it was a gradual thing for me. The real move towards focusing on this was setting up an importation, a booze import business called Alchemy Imports back here in Australia in about 2003, I think it was. And that idea that I could, be my own boss, and do something I was good at really appealed to me. So I think the decision to stick with it probably was more beyond just bartending. It was more of an industry decision rather than like I want to bartend. That business didn't go so well, but it rolled into other ones that did better. But I think it was like a gradual thing for me.
So you went to Behind Bars, which was like your big training, education, which has always been a big core for you. Like I've seen some of your manuals and some of your mantras for O to V and that sort of thing. And like education and training has always been like a massive mantra for you. And Behind Bars, like how long was Behind Bars? Well, how long was Behind Bars around for?
I think it was around for a bit blurry, man. I think it was around for like 11 years.
And really, like when we go back to that era, like there wasn't much in the way of what you were doing. Like nowadays, Ananas and all these online platforms, we're talking pre-internet days where like you couldn't just go online. Like I try and always remind bartenders of pre-internet days when you go to a bookstore and like collect books purely not because of their pretty pictures of stuff, out of pure necessity. You had to collect books. You want to learn anything about classics, it's coming out of a book.
Oh, you got to have the books. Oh yeah, man. I've got, Jesus, I've got a few hundred cocktail books, at least. So I got the old original Jerry Thomas books and shit like that, like kicking about. Because you had to get them, if you wanted to learn back then. I mean, behind bars was an interesting thing. It didn't start as a training business. It basically kicked off as I was doing some consultancy work, like a lot of people would do, create drinks and communications out to the industry. And I came across this bourbon brand who had this really ridiculous on-premise activation idea where, in short, they're going to put up these barber poles in venues and little barber stations, and guys who came up to have their beard shaved would get a free bourbon and Coke at the bar. And they want to activate this on Friday nights in these venues, and they had all these numbers on how many they should reach. And I remember sitting in the meeting going, all right, so but how are you compensating for the lack of turnover, loss of turnover for these venues, and a bunch of other questions. Of course, this area would take up similar space, which meant they could not accommodate as many people in the venue. I had questions around public liability. What happened if the guy's having a shave, Billy walks in, he's like, hey, he turns around, all of a sudden he gets a fucking nick in the neck. There was all these questions around, is this safe? And these guys hadn't thought of that. And it came to my kind of idea that, there's a market here for someone who understands how the on-premise works, who can talk to brands and make sure that when they're activating in the on-premise, it works in the on-premise. Like, these people were good at coming up with campaigns for TV and bottle shops, not so much for activating in bars. And that's kind of how Behind Bars came about as a business. And then eventually it merged into training, simply because I've always been really passionate about training. Coming out of the Navy and the military, training is like the number one thing that they focus on there, or learning how to educate.
Talking about education, like, again, I think it goes back to that era. Like, I remember I left Australia in 2006, and even 2006, like, there was like yourself and a few other people in Sydney and Melbourne were like leaning into the training thing, but a lot of venues still weren't keen on training. Like, there was sort of mediocre average training from all the brands and brand staff training and stuff like that. But really, in the grand scheme of things, there was no one coming in going, so you're going to pay me to train your staff to be better. What sort of, because I still think in a lot of cities, there's still that sort of barrier of entry that a lot of owners and a lot of operators give themselves when it comes to outside consultants. How did you get over that? How did you jump over that barrier?
I mean,
except for being super charming.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, we did a few trainings directly for venues, where we could demonstrate that there would be uplift in volume and stuff. And my first bar job that I ever got, I went into the bar and basically, bigged myself up and told them I was better than I was. But that's what you do when you're fucking 20. And I basically said, if I do a free shift for you on Friday night, and you reckon you'll do just as well without me, then don't hire me. But if you really think you can be just as good without me as you are with me, then there's no drama. But if you think I added something to that team, then put me on a shift on Saturday, and they would always get me a job. And it kind of similar work for the consultancy piece. I would go in and do free work a lot of the time, just to prove that I could deliver results, and then that would result in a contract. But a lot of venues weren't willing to pay or didn't believe they had to pay because they'd operated for 10, 20, 30 years. Sometimes they had several generations of publicans and who hadn't done any training. It's just jump behind the bar, pour the beer, fucking whatever. And so the goal really became to convince the liquor companies that we could add value to their customers and drive turnover of their products by training them. So we trained 15,000 bartenders a year back then, but Diageo was paying for it. Because when we trained the staff, that venue increased their turnover, which then increased sales of volume on behalf of Diageo. So that's how we, grew the training component of the business back then.
That still doesn't happen in Canada. I still don't see that existing in Canada still yet. Still a very thing that's missing.
It's hard because you need the data. So, I was very conscientious of the fact that, my time, I might value my time X amount per hour or whatever, but the brands aren't paying for my time. the brands are paying for a result.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like if somebody comes to paint your wall and you go, I'm willing to pay $1,000 to paint the wall, or whatever, and they agree to the quote. Now, whether or not they spend 500 hours or 2 hours, as long as the outcome is the same, you agreed on a price, right? But quite often what happens is that they'll charge you by the hour, not for the outcome, and all of a sudden that wall costs $1,500 because they underestimate how long it would take. And that creates a discord between the customer and and I suppose the provider. And that's a big thing when it comes to consultancy, is that I found, you got to demonstrate value first, and then you can agree on a price after. But quite often the price comes up first, and there's no tangible link to the result. So that's how we built it. We built it gradually by demonstrating, increased volume in venues. We would have a small a trial example, like a small sample field, if you like, of venues, demonstrate progress there, and then that would grow out to a lot of venues. But it was fucking hard work to get off the ground. Luckily at the time, Diageo was really saw the benefit in it and believed also in it as a competitive advantage over their other suppliers, because at the time there were no other training programs in Australia. It was the only one. There was no brand ambassadors. There was nobody was doing training like this, and so it became a real competitive advantage for them when negotiating contracts as well.
So with that going forward, I asked Jesse Vita this the other day about like working at Blacktail and Dead Rabbit, and then going to work at Atlas. With that in mind, like, what year did you? Eau de Vie was your first bar, right, in Sydney?
Yeah.
What year was that?
2010, 10 years ago.
Wow, that feels much longer ago. But Shantan was like, how did you go from what, and why did you go from there? Like, you're obviously at the top of your game. Behind Bars was doing well.
Yeah.
You could have just rested on your laurel and just like gone like, and really it's that big crossover to open your own bar. Like a lot of people, especially now, it's a big gap. And why did you take the jump from owning a super successful consulting training business to going in all on your own?
A lot of reasons for that. Some of them had to do with just personal motivation and getting something out of life. So by the time we opened, Eau de Vie had Behind Bars for 7 years. I've been the first 5-6 years were pretty fucking good. Learned a lot, really enjoyed it. And then it became difficult. The amount of things I had to execute, that was terrible. And I told the client it was not going to work, but I had to do it anyway because they're the client. I just got tired of to something you're not being listened to and stuff. And wanted to do something new to motivate myself. I like to pivot out a bit. And then, so that was one reason. Another reason was I got really tired of being told that people didn't want to drink a gin and tonic or Negroni after work. They wanted beer and wine, and they wanted 2 of those, ideally 3 of those, and then they were going to switch to booze once they decided to get fucked up. And so all the briefs I was getting were like, how do we get people from switching to a bourbon after 2 drinks instead of waiting for 3? And I was like, well, fucking let's get them on one straight away. And I was told it couldn't be done. So we opened a bar where, immediately, we opened up with turnover was about 70% with cocktails. Beer sales never, ever got over 2% in that venue in 10 years. It's still below 1.5% per week. Wine sales, we have weeks where wines don't even touch the 1% mark. We sell spirits. And we always did. And I wanted to kind of prove that you could do that if you put in place the right environment for it, and you trained your team on it. Because it's harder to sell spirits than it is to sell beer and wine, I believe, especially 10 years ago when people weren't really ordering spirits and cocktails. So part of it was to kind of prove that it could be done. And another one as well is there's this saying, right, when it comes to teaching, right, that those who can do and those who can't teach. And so I also felt like we had something to prove, because we did work with a lot of bars and consult to a lot of bars. And I didn't want to be someone who went into venues and said that, this is how you can do stuff. And, by not being able to prove that I'd done it. And so Eau de Vie to some degree also was there as a kind of putting ourselves out there to demonstrate that, what we said could work, and we wanted to demonstrate an environment that, and actually kind of test our thesis, if you like. So there's a lot of reasons behind opening the bar, and I think anyone working in this industry, not everybody, but a lot of us, have this idea of our dream bar. And I certainly had worked on, what would, my ultimate bar look like. And, we were always looking around full spaces here and there, but it's only when we came across this one specific space that I realized that this is where we could do it. We actually discovered it while we were looking for a place to have the final for the Australian World Class competition. I think it was the first year. And I found this bar, it's closed down. So it was no longer operating. The tenant had been locked out ages ago, like 6 months earlier. And so we came and cleaned it up. It meant we had we could be there all day. We didn't have to get out for the venue when they opened in the evening. We had a fully controlled environment. We could be in there for several days. And they had this, it was a bar and restaurant, and they had this bar tucked at the back. And I was like, fuck, that's a great little bar. And so we managed to get a deal with the landlord where he separated the venue out into 2 leases, leased the separate out to a restaurant to someone else, and we took the bar at the back.
Wow.
Yeah, it was cool.
I still think, like saying 10 years ago isn't that long ago. Like I took over Clive's in Victoria 11 years ago now. And I sort of look at it as like, in the grand scheme of like our age group, cocktail culture hasn't been around for that long.
No, that's
in
right.
The macro, like there's been little pockets, London, New York, San Francisco, LA, that sort of thing. But even in Australia, like cocktail culture in Australia started in 2005, 2004, 5, 6 sort of area.
But even then, like I'd say, even after ODV opened, you could go be 2012 and a good cocktail bar was still at 50% of sales here.
100%. And then being in Singapore last year opened my eyes to, it took me back to Australia 20 years ago. Like when I started in the industry, like Singapore like gets written about and like everybody loves it, but it is very much like Australia was 20 years ago, where cocktail bars are open, but people are still just drinking beer and people are still nailing through wine, and consumer knowledge is still very low, and everybody raves about the city. And I love Singapore like to the nth degree, but the cocktail culture is 8 years old. Like it started in 2012, and everybody's like trying to be like London and New York. I'm like, you guys got a few steps. You missed a few steps. Like you don't make an old fashioned properly yet. Like maybe you should do that before you go fat washing or centrifuging something.
It takes a while for consumers to catch up. I think that's the thing with bars. Bars in many ways lead the way. I mean, you look at, I saw this, I haven't seen the video, but I heard about this dude, the actor making the Negroni online the other day. But you go back 15 years. One of the things I used to do for Diageo was I used to run this training course on, how to not be a dickhead in the on-premise, and basically just training their staff when they started. We didn't call it that. I had a better name. But the purpose of that, I had a slightly more, corporate approved name. But the point of the course was to teach sales reps how to behave in the on-premise and how to gain respect from bartenders and how to not be a dick there. Like, people used to come back into venues and have a massive night, and they come to the bar and go, oh, fuck, can I just drop off a case of vodka on Monday to sort this out? And you're like, I can't pay my staff in vodka, dickhead. Yeah. But one of the things we used to do was teach them how to make Negronis and how to drink Negronis. And we even had like this, like, okay, well, fucking, if you can't drink a Negroni, with Campari, try with Aperol and then work your way in. And the purpose of it was so that these guys went into venues, they would be drinking drinks that were credible. So bartenders would go, wow, this guy drinks Negroni. Maybe, there's something more to this dude than I thought. And they would be not ordering fucking Toblerones as fucking aperitivos, and down their palate and tea.
Oh, the fucking Toblerone.
It's just the shit we're doing. And so today to see that, that cocktail, which I think was featured in that, Vintage Spirits of Cocktails book 15 odd years ago, is now mainstream as fuck. But it takes the trade to push that first, right? So it's good that Singapore bars are doing all that, and eventually the customers will catch up, for sure. And you got loads of expats there, which would definitely help.
Oh, dude, I love it. Reminded me so much of being back home. And like such an open market, get everything from everyone. Everybody's got a kickback. Everybody like brings you free crap. It's just it was amazing, especially coming from Canada, which is like super over legalized on everything. Like going to Singapore was night and day. Like
Oh, really?
oh yeah, 5+1s and 4+1s on orders, and it was just awesome. But so Ordervie opened in 2010 in Sydney.
Yeah.
What year did you open? Or was Ordervie in Melbourne next?
Yeah, so we did Odyssey Melbourne in 2011, and then we opened a bar called the Roosevelt in 2012. So once we started opening bars, it went pretty quickly. I had a friend of mine, and we met him through work. We started as work colleagues. Greg Sanderson worked for me at Behind Bars for 5 years, I believe. First as a trainer, then as a Reserve Brands ambassador. One of the most hardworking, people I know. And we got to a point where I couldn't promote him within Behind Bars. There was no way for him to go in the national role. We didn't have anything available, and there was nothing else for him to learn. And so he basically floated the idea of opening a bar, and I suggested we do one together. And that, seeing that I had a business running, I could find the money, so you wouldn't have to go look for investors and stuff. And so we opened ODV Melbourne together October 2011, so about 18 months after we opened ODV Sydney. And that was very scary. It didn't start out so well. ODV was hidden in Sydney. And in Melbourne, it was in a laneway off a laneway, because it's Melbourne, and we thought they were fucking used to hard to find venues. Yeah. That was like the Melbourne fucking thing. And then, but we had no sign. We just had this door, and for the first 6 months, we had no business. It was horrible, so scary. But eventually, it really started to pick up. Word of mouth got out there, and I think today it's now it's closed, fucking COVID. But prior to COVID, it would have been one of the busiest cocktail bars in Australia, if not the world, in terms of turnover per square meter and stuff. It's crazy. And that's really been like the anchor for the business as it's grown, ODV Melbourne.
See, that's things like I find. How did you keep positive? Because the hardest thing when I opened up Little Jumbo in 2013, ours was in sort of the back of a commercial building, so you had to go down a hallway of a commercial building, no signage, the same sort of thing, just an open sign lit up on the door. Yeah. Little logo on the front door, but it was 10 meters off the main thing. And you inspired me a lot in my sort of mantra of laneway bars. Like, it's not a speakeasy per se, but it's a laneway bar. Like, if you know where it is, you're going to find it. Yeah. And after 3 to 4 months, we can go into a whole different episode about business partners and whatnot. You have a quiet month and it's oh fuck, this concept's not working. How do you stay on point with a concept that, regardless if you've been successful in Sydney, how do you stay super positive and super on brand and concept in Melbourne for 6 months, even though you're oh fuck, this may not work out?
Well, I'm not gonna say I was super positive.
Yeah, come on, let's do a rah rah rah. Do a rah 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 style speech.
Yeah. No, it was hard. But I think the thing was for us, you invested a lot of money in it. So if you're losing a little bit each week, it's still worth going. We're pot committed in a way, right? Which isn't a smart thing to be, but we were pot committed. So that kind of, we felt we had no choice. My business partner Greg is a unique human being, and his faith in the project and his responses to my fear, I think really is what kept us going. But also, we knew from Sydney, and having worked in bars a long time, that the way we wanted to build our bar was that we didn't want to launch with a bang. We wanted to grow it slowly. And so we could see, it might do 20,000 one week, and then it might be 21 the next, and then 18, 19. But as long as we're only losing a little bit of money, not too much, we felt it was worth sticking with it. And at the time, ODV Sydney was going really well, so that we could cover any losses that we had in Melbourne from Sydney whilst we built up that trajectory. I think it's that understanding that we wanted to build it slowly, not launch with a bang, was a big thing. Because quite often for us, we don't want to be cool. Being cool is a fucking nail in the coffin for a lot of good bars. Once you're cool, because we opened for a specific type of person. We didn't open for cool people. We didn't open for people who were trendy or any of that shit. We opened for people who like a good drink. Mm-hmm. You know, we were after boosters. We were after people who like fucking cocktails, like whiskey, like spirits, like to have a conversation with their friends without fucking having to yell, because the music was low and it was carpeted everywhere and you could have a conversation in there. So we opened for people who of a mature age, like 30, 35, 40 and over, was like our market. It takes a while to get those people into your venue. But when you open and you try to be cool and you get all these fucking mid-20s and, you know, celebrities and Instagram models and shit and fucking bloggers back then, and you get this, you know, then you're very cool and you're in the paper, but you're famous for attracting good-looking people, right? And they're only coming for, they go to the opening of envelopes. They're going to fucking go to the next thing 3 months later. Yeah. And then that whole thing that you made it on is gone. So our foundation wasn't going to be that. Foundation was going to be quality service and a great experience and great cocktails. And we knew that was going to take time. So we knew it was going to take a while before we got where we wanted to be. So that kind of, it was part of the plan, I suppose, was one of the reasons we stuck with it.
So even with all this work going on, you went and opened Roosevelt in 2012.
Well, fucking Roosevelt was a whole thing, other thing.
Because really three bars in 2 years, or 3 bars in like 2.5 years.
I was 3 bars in 2 years, almost on the date. It was fucked up.
It's intense.
Yeah, it was. Well, then we did 2 this year in fucking 3 months. Yeah. Well, not the building of it all, but Roosevelt was different. We had this idea for a bar, and I was looking around for it to do with some friends. As a separate. We didn't have a speakeasy group. We didn't plan to have a bar group. We had 2 bars, you know, the one in Melbourne and the one in Sydney, and we were fine. And then I love cheese and I fucking love cured meat. And we had this idea for this tiny little wine bar, and I couldn't find a space. And I walked into this one venue, which became the Roosevelt, and it just felt like it was built for this idea I'd had back in my mind. And we played with this concept of cocktail degustations. And we had this beautiful room facing the kitchen. We built these massive tables, 16-person tables, bar height. So you sat on high chairs, and we did a 5-course cocktail degustation there. And then we did the front bar was more like a I suppose just bar and bar food area, and we had a poker room at the back. It was fucking beautiful. And I suppose we just opened it because we found it. I had friends who want to be part of it, and we felt we really knew the Sydney area, and we had a lot of, at the time, Woodview was so fucking busy, we could barely, we had lines down the hallway out the door, so we thought we'd jump in on it. Not sure it was a smart move, but it certainly was a lot of fun. And it surprised me. It's really weird that we didn't tell anyone we were opening. You know, the media, of course, knew we were doing it. But on the first night, I was there with my wife and my business partner and his wife, trying to have dinner and drinks and enjoy the opening. And now I was barbacking or working the door the whole night. My mate was working the kitchen the whole night, and my wife ended up having to host while I was basically cleaning glasses and collecting plates. I'm like, who the fuck are these people? Well, how do you know? You know, like good friends of mine don't know we're opening. How the fuck do you know we're opening? You know? But there's people out there who pay attention to that shit. And it was really interesting to see how many people actually are hooked into this industry and are keen to see what's going on. It was weird.
So that was 8 years ago. What was the next venture after? How many bars and restaurants do you have now?
Well, we got 8 as part of the Speakeasy Group. The Roosevelt I no longer own 100%. I got a small share in it. Our venue manager, Ben Hickey, who ran it for several years, approached me and wanted to buy it off me because he wanted to have his own venue, and he had the finance to do so, but he really loved the Roosevelt and would like to stay there. So if you don't count the Roosevelt, we currently have 8. And I'm hoping that will be the case post COVID-19 as well. We don't know though.
So did you take a break after Roosevelt to open your next place?
We took a little break. We opened not long one. We opened Boilermaker House 5 years ago. I think, 5 years ago. So I think we had a year and a bit break before we decided to start work on Boilermaker. And after we opened Boilermaker, we took quite a long break out because we had the lockout laws come in Sydney, and that really knocked us out. Just to see how our industry could be knocked on its ass by the stroke of a pen overnight without any real data to back up the decision was brutal, and that really scared us off doing new things for a few years.
That's all been resolved now, though, right? It's all back to relatively normal.
Yes and no. I mean, not really. There's areas in Sydney still under lockout laws. The area that ODV's in and the Roosevelt. I mean, the Roosevelt area is still in lockout. That zone, the King's Cross, and ODV is right on the outside of that. So, we lost 85% of foot traffic there. So when you go from 80,000 people coming on a weekend to 6,000 coming on a weekend, impacts business. We had 30 bars and restaurants closed there in the space of 2 years in a 1 by 1 kilometer radius, more or less. So it's that area is never going to bounce back. And I think large parts of Sydney has changed. Yes, they've rolled them back to lockout laws, but it's not
too little, too late.
Yeah, and it's also not the same. The people's habits have changed. People's confidence in the system has changed, and the announcements that the government come out with are really press releases, and then there's a lot of detail on the back that isn't seen by the consumers or guests or the industry at large. So it's not as simple as they're no longer in place. There's still plenty in place.
So when did you open? I can never pronounce it properly. Mjolnir.
Mjolnir.
Now this one is kind of because you've always lent into things that you're passionate about, but this is kind of taking that to a completely different level. Like you lent into passionate pieces, knowing the macro of the culture at that time can sustain it because you've been passionate about it.
Yeah.
But your steakhouses are like your Mjolnir's is freaking a Scandinavian steakhouse. Is that correct?
No, it's even worse. It's even worse. It's even worse. It's a Viking-inspired restaurant and bar, and we play in the Viking theme bit. So it's named Mjolnir after Thor's hammer. And I came across this space, and I had a few years ago, and I had this idea for the space, but I just could not work it out financially, and the location was wrong. The location is terrible. It's a horrible location, and I said to myself, we're not opening any venues in the suburbs anymore. We're just going to be in the CBD. The lockout laws have scared me. I need to be in the CBD. And then, fuck it, we found this space, and it's ran down, horrible, damn basement, but beautiful, had potential. And I came up with this idea that, so my kids are called Odin and Loki. So I'm committed on the Viking thing. And we're watching Marvel a lot. And I came up with this idea that, if Marvel exists, if the Avengers exist, and Thor is real, and Hulk exists, and fucking Black Widow and the crew, and Thor is here on Midgard fighting fucking baddies, right? He can't go home, so he gets homesick. And what would be the natural thing for him to do? I don't know how much whiskey I drunk at this point, but this is the thinking behind it. And so the thinking was, what would he do? Well, he'd open a feasting hall, right, where he could relive the merriment of Valhalla with his friends and colleagues on Earth. And so that became and he would name it, of course, Mjolnir, after his hammer that gives him his power. And so in mythology, it doesn't give him his power. In mythology, it's a great weapon. In mythology, he's got a belt called Menningur that doubles his strength. But anyway, and I floated this idea with Greg and my wife, and I thought it was a stupid, crazy idea. But they really liked it. So we took a punt on it. It was very strange. So you go there, we have a Viking ship, like a small kind of mini Viking ship hanging off the wall as you walk in. So you get met with a dragon head kind of fucking looking up at you. All tables have runes carved into them. You get a shot of meat on arrival. Quite often we will toast the old Norse gods as you sit down. We have a very limited menu, and it's all inspired around. So because the origin story of the venue is it's a fictitious universe. This is Thor exists. We're not going to recreate old Viking food. That would suck ass. You'd eat potatoes and fucking fish only, more or less, and loads of very bland vegetables. So fuck that. If Vikings were around today, what would they eat? And I'm like, would they eat bone marrow? Fuck yeah, they would have bone marrow. You know, would they have big fucking, you know, bones of like fucking short rib and meat? Fuck yeah, they would have that. Whole fish, fuck yeah. So we just kind of went with what would Vikings have today, and that's the inspiration for the food menu. It's the inspiration for the cocktail list, and it's the inspiration for everything we do in there. And when you sit down for dinner, we fucked up the sequence of service, you know. So you have the whole, you get greeted, but you have a shot and a fucking Viking toast. We present you the menu, but then we bring out this leather roll with knives, and all the knives are specifically made for us. We may get them made in Russia, Pakistan, Finland, Norway, Canada, the States, and all these guys are making Viking-inspired knives for us, where they, you know, wooden handles, bone handles. They carve Viking motifs into them. They cost me about $200 a fucking pop to buy their hunting knives. And then each person choose their weapon for dinner. So you get to choose to fucking, you know, it's cool. And then, you know, there's a bunch of other stuff that happens. And we made the experience also so that, you know, we sell mostly cocktails. So there's not a lot of wine and beer. I mean, all the beer comes in horns. So the favorite of beer goes in because you fucking, you know, like this shit. You know, who doesn't want to drink beer out of a horn? I got my water in here, so it's all good. And then a lot of cocktails that we put on fire and shit. So it's a really theatrical kind of environment, and it worked way better than we thought it would. Way better. And so we opened another one in Mjolnir pretty much like almost on the day, 12 months later.
You have one in Sydney, one in Melbourne now?
Yeah.
Now, just to take a step back on this concept, because it is insane. If someone had come to you when you were doing behind bars and said, Sven, I got an idea for a bar and a restaurant that I think we should make, would you have said they were crazy?
You probably, yeah. but the thing is though, as a consultant, I kept getting really frustrated when I talked to bar owners about their product, and they kept telling me they were selling food and beer. And I'm trying to convince them that they were selling an experience, and who gave a fuck about their food and beer, because I could get their product across the road for a quarter of the price at the bottle shop. So you're not going to stay in business if that's what you think you're doing. And so as we started building our venues, we've always focused on experience. And I think, you know, what we considered experience today or 10 years ago is not going to be enough in 10 years. To you know, we need to keep improving that element. But you know, by going back to that really kind of is how Mjolnir came about. We got loads of advice to not do it. One of the guys I respect the most here as a food critic and restaurant critic emailed me and told me it was a bad idea. He said, you know, I can show you all kinds of data on how opening a venue where nobody can fucking pronounce the name is a bad idea. He goes, because nobody's going to feel confident recommending going there with their friends. So that cuts down on visits. Then not being able to spell it also sucks for you. So come up with a different name, and it might work. And but I sometimes do. I do sometimes this keynote talk for business owners on how we created a great business by ignoring great business advice. So for us, that's kind of just par for course. We thought, you know, the less sense this makes, the more impact it might actually end up having. And it did.
What sort of, like, to get away from all the fun and jovialness, how is because I know how it's hit us in Canada, and I've been chatting to so many people, and it's devastated our industry here. How has it devastated you guys as badly as the rest of the world in Australia?
Oh yeah, you know, we've been closed now for 5 weeks, I think. You know, so you have no income at all. We haven't done any pivots, so we have zero income, but we still have lots of expenses. We still have to cover a portion of our rent. We are still paying staff annual leave that's been worked out while we were trading, that we owe them, obviously. We have staff that are still working that we are paying for, and we have you know, a lot of, you know, outgoing obligations that we still got to have. So for every business, it's devastating. Some businesses were more, I think, well positioned to pivot and take advantage of the new environment. I think some people actually seen an increase in trade as a result of it. But those pivots we didn't feel they were right for us. And so we've simply closed all venues, and are now working on, basically our internal systems and procedures and getting ready for reopening and see how we can be a better business when we are allowed to reopen.
Do you think as an experience-based business, like you just really went heavily into your business being an experience over a sales job, do you think that, because for me, in my opinion, I think people are going to be going out for experiences more so after this, like
Yeah.
it's less money in the system, the staffing is going to be really difficult because a lot of restaurants are shutting, so the staff that you do rehire are going to be on point and epic. But I think people are going to lean into having an experience over just going out to eat and drink. It's going to be like 10, 15 years ago where it's a night, once a week special occasion. Let's go out for the best experience instead of it being more so, let's go out every single night of the week and have fun.
Well, yeah. So when we've done a lot of recession planning. So Greg and I thought that the recession was going to hit us this year anyway. We didn't think it was going to be fucking this thing happening, but we, looking at how the economy's been traveling, looking at the inflated value of the stock market, the tech companies being 1,000 times fucking EBITDA in terms of valuation, was most businesses would be lucky to get 12. That kind of thing. We've kind of looked, it's going to be a recession coming, and we've positioned our business as a special occasion business. Like that's literally what you said is our positioning. Mm-hmm. So we believe that people still come out for those special occasions when restrictions are lifted. However, the big problem I think is going to be is that we're most likely, I mean, the States might be different because of fucking Looney Tunes got in charge there, but the rest of the world, we're going to have restrictions on how many people you can have in your venue. And the thing with venues is that the experience isn't solely provided by us. The experience is also provided by friends and other guests in the venue. And if you can't interact with other people in the venue, then that knocks bars on their ass. Restaurants still have a way to have a reason to live here, but bars are going to not so much if you got to keep social distancing between tables. So I think that's going to be interesting. Also, whether or not you have 50 people in your restaurant or 100 people in your restaurant, you may still require the same team in the kitchen, mm-hmm. Or 80% of the team in the kitchen for 50% of the turnover. And without being able to fill your venue up shoulder to shoulder or create that intimacy that we like intimate venues, we like for people to meet each other and start talking to the table next to them. We like them to, quite often, what would happen is, say at Mjolnir, somebody sits there with a bottle of wine because that's what they do when they go to dinner. This happened to me when I was there. I was there with 3 friends, and we had a couple, or father and son next to us with a glass of wine for dinner. Meanwhile, at our table, shit was being put on fire. We were doing whiskey luges off the bone marrow. And the dad goes to me, what the fuck is going on with this table? What kind of dinner is this? I'm like, it's a fucking Viking feast, bro. Get with the program. And so then they were like, well, fuck, we'll put this wine aside for later. And then they started having cocktails as well. So, that interaction, if we can't sit next to each other, then that's going to be very, very dangerous hospitality. I think we have to consider the fact that we are a business that rely on social intimacy, not social distancing. And I think that might fuck our business model up big time. So I'm really rooting for a cure and a vaccine. And I think closing down was a fucking walk in the park compared to reopening. Is my prediction. I'm not looking forward to reopening at all.
No,
I am.
For you, I think
it's harder.
For you, you're super dynamic, and obviously you and Greg super strategic with everything. Do you feel like this could be a bit of a reset for the hospitality industry in a way that it's going to clean away the chaff from the corn and that sort of thing? There's going to be pros coming out of it.
I'm not sure it's going to clean away the chaff from the corn or whatever. I hear a lot of people say the great operators will survive. I don't know. I think, unfortunately, a lot of growth companies are, a lot of great companies people we look to, I think, are great operators, are people that grow their business. And people who grow their business quite often have debt. And if you have debt right now, before you closed, you're opening up with a lot more debt. Debt to your landlord, debt to your bank, most likely debt to your team in terms of accrued annual leave, etc. So I think we'll see a lot of really great venues close simply because nobody could foresee that we were going to close down for this long, and a lot of the measures that have been put in place aren't overly helpful. I think we'll see a massive reset in that, at least in Australia, and I think it's the same worldwide. With the death of retail, we've had this boom in hospitality where every new fucking high rise is putting cafes and bars and restaurants into the bottom, because previously the clothing stores and the sneaker shops and all that shit, you know, the Mac repair things, whatever, those fucking things are gone because we're going online and buying our stuff now. So retail's going down, and it's been replaced by this huge oversupply of hospitality venues. And I think, you know, a lot of venues will not reopen. So definitely be a big reset in that way. But I'm not sure it's gonna be all the good ones survive. It depends what you mean by good ones. You know, I think healthy businesses will survive. And quite often when people talk about, you know, what a great bar makes a great bar or great restaurants, you look at the rankings around the world, and God knows whatever these awards are, as well as the restaurant critics, right? A lot of these venues aren't fucking businesses, man. They are showcases. They are a physical manifestation of someone's ego, but they don't make money. You know, and I think that a lot of venues, if you weren't a profitable business, and if you weren't had good kind of financial management, you're not going to come out of this. And that'll probably mean a lot of our favorite restaurants and bars are going to get included in that carnage.
So that being said, like, you've got on one hand your businesses, and I know that we're short for time now, but like, you've got your businesses and your own stresses and all this sort of stuff. What pushed you? And I can obviously tell you the reason why, but like, what really pushed you to do Ananas as a free resource during COVID-19? Because like, there's a balance. Like, you're already short cash flow, and now you're going to give away one of your biggest assets for free. I can understand, like, from a hospitality point of view, from a business point of view, like, but why?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I have a you know the saying, fucking what's it called? You know, what's the thing? Everything goes in war and business or something like that, right? And people saw, you know, it's just business. You know, I've always had this approach that just because it's business doesn't give you permission to be a dick. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And for us, you know, I'm on one hand, I'm negotiating rent-free periods with my landlords. I'm reaching out to my point of sale system to fucking halt my subscription service payments because I'm not using it. I can't in good conscience charge people for use my platform when there's no income. I can't do it like this. You got to have a moral compass in this world. And I think, you know, as long as I've been in business, I've tried to always balance ethics with financials and make sure that we do the right thing. And so for us, it was a pretty, you know, easy thing to do, and also selfish thing to do. By doing it, I'm getting a lot of positives back. I'm getting people emailing me, texting me. I got people, you know, sending us messages, thanking us for doing it. We're helping venues with their internal training programs and assisting them with getting ready for reopening. And so that positive reinforcement at a time like this, to be honest, is part of what, you know, fuels my mental health. So it's not like it's a one-way street. You know, we get a lot back from it as well, to be honest. And that's been, you know, when we've had some pretty shitty days, having someone, you know, message us and thank us for being able to learn all the stuff for venues, it really is sometimes what helps me get through the day.
That's good to hear, man. Well, I really thank you for your time, man. That was awesome to catch up. Like, it was fantastic. And just learning about the great thing with the podcast is that I have good friends, long-standing friends like yourself and a few others that I've sat down with, and then they throw this massive curveball like, oh, by the way, I was in the Norwegian military for 2.5 years. And you're like, oh, fuck, how did I not know that? Like, I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and I mentioned something about where I grew up in Australia. And she's like, you have never ever talked about your upbringing. I'm like, nah, Yeah, no one needs to know that I didn't wear shoes till I was 18 years old and I was living up in the sticks behind Brisbane for freaking most of my life. Like, it's just a different part of the story. But I really appreciate your time, man. I thank you so much.
Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate being on it, man. It's good to catch up. And I think, doing these things, like catching up on the phone, on video calls during this time is important, to see people and having a conversation with others outside of, the people that you're locked in with 24/7.
Yeah.
Is again a big part of staying focused and, trying to get through this with, mental health somewhat intact,
Somewhat intact.
somewhat.
Hey,
Well,
buddy.
it's hard. I think everyone's got it tough. I think not everybody, but a lot of people got it tough during this time. So it's,
Yeah.
it's good to
We
do
don't
this.
all have families to hang out with.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hey, man, well, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again. I'll chat to you real soon, man.
Thanks for having me, bro.
See you, buddy.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.